So this is my first ever Patreon voted video, and it's about gatekeeping, specifically in regards to Ashes of Creation. If you'd like to influence next month's video, consider joining Patreon at the Alpha Genesis tier or higher and voting in the poll next month. Gatekeeping is a word that has exploded in popularity in the last few years, and to me is one that is often used in a negative connotation. I myself have been called a gatekeeper a few times in my comments in regards to Ashes of Creation, and as a result I've started to wonder, is gatekeeping actually a bad thing, at least in regards to Ashes of Creation? And the reason I say that is because I often see people look at this game and they want to change it to fit what they have liked in prior MMOs. But sometimes the things people want changed do not fit within the design pillars of this game and are simply not possible, at least in the way they want them to be. For instance, there have been some that have said they will not play an MMO that has always on PvP. I understand where that mentality comes from on multiple levels, despite being someone who actually does like that this MMO will have always on PvP. The biggest reason I think that people don't like always on PvP is because in past MMOs that had PvP turned on, there were zero consequences for those that gank the unwilling. A great example is WoW. When they used to have PvP servers, there were absolutely no consequences at all for gankers. It didn't matter at all if a max level killed a level 10 player. That player suffered zero consequences, and that is not going to be the case in Ashes of Creation. A lot of MMO players have never experienced an open world PvP system that has consequences for the attackers. As such, they are convinced that open world PvP always being on cannot work. And there are those that are convinced on both sides that the corruption penalties will absolutely work or they will absolutely not work. And the truth is, we just don't know yet. But in my opinion, let's see how they actually work before we make any decisions on the supposed efficacy of the corruption system. In my opinion though, based on what we have seen on paper for this system, I'm actually of the opinion that corruption is incredibly punishing and might actually severely restrict open world PvP, and maybe even too much. But again, this is an assumption and far from a fact at this point. So really, we don't know yet. Either way, risk to reward is a primary design principle of this game, and always on PvP is not likely at all to be taken out of the design of this MMO. So if I gatekeep by saying this MMO might not be for you, if you cannot have any PvP on in your MMO, even with severe penalties for the attackers, would it actually be a bad thing to say that this MMO is probably not for you? I suggest that it isn't, because this is not going to change. You're not going to change this to a MMO without open world PvP. It's not happening. And the good thing for that is there's a lot of MMOs out there that have that if that's what you like. There are a lot of MMOs that have no PvP in the open world if that's what you want. So simply just go play those. I know that's gatekeeping, but I don't think that's actually a bad thing. And there have been many other suggestions that I think really don't fit into the core design principles of this game. For instance, a competitive PvE rating scene, at least one that is similar to what we have seen in heavily instanced theme park MMOs, is not likely in Ashes, in my opinion. And I see no way to fit that into the design without a massive alteration of the core principles surrounding this project. And I really believe that you cannot design raid bosses that are as complex and challenging in an open world environment as you can in an instanced environment. I think Roar said something like this in one of his videos, or maybe it was in Discord, and I agree with him. And with Ashes PvE encounters being 80% open world with only 20% being instanced, and the instance dungeons being focused around delivering story and narrative, I don't see any way to fit that competitive raiding scene into this project without adding more instancing, which I don't see them doing, as that would not fit with their core design. Now, there will be plenty of competition in both PvE and PvP. There are planned to be leaderboards for the number of dungeons and raids completed, PvP kills, caravans completed, and even gathering activity. There are also guild ladders for world bosses, guild wars, and castle sieges, and there's an arena ladder and PvP seasons. But the world first race that we have seen in retail WoW, while it still might exist in Ashes, it will not be necessarily on a fair and level playing field. Without instancing, and with each server being different based on node progression, and most importantly with always on PvP being a huge factor factor. I don't see this race being similar in terms of how the world force will work. But for me, because of all the extra variables involved, and because I do like PvP, I find it a much more intriguing race for world first than what we currently see with the very much on-rails experience of the modern raiding scene. Will it be fair, or will it attract that player base to want to compete in the PvE raiding scene in Ashes? I think the answer to both is probably no. And would it even be worth it for Ashes to try to attract that player base? In the WoW raiding scene, only about 10% of players participate in the competitive raiding scene, which is very similar to the percentage of players that participate in the competitive PvP scene. And quite simply, the changes needed to make that happen are just not going to happen. Steven has been incredibly clear that certain things are not up for discussion when it comes to the core design of this MMO. They do like feedback, but the feedback is only for changes that fit within the framework of the core design. Here's Steven from the April community Q&A answering a question from my boy Richie SH, talking directly about feedback and how much they are committed to sticking to the core principles of the game.
How far are you willing to go in response to player feedback on core systems? For example, if there's a huge outcry at launch to have more instance dungeons and raids, is that something you would address, or are you standing firm on the more open world aspect of it?
To first answer that question, player feedback is important. However, the identity and the vision of the game is not up for discussion. And so when we talk about the core systems and tenets and philosophies behind what the game that we're trying to make is, we believe that the game we are trying to make resonates with a large enough section of the MMORPG player base that it is a sustainable and profitable venture for us to create that core game. Now, the ancillary systems that live around the core philosophy of Ashes of Creation, or the subtleties in what we need to do in order to make a particular system or feature better, right? That is why we interface with. That is the reason that we want to collect player feedback. The identity of the game, when you leave that up to council design, so to speak, right? That's when you start running into an identity crisis. And I think that if the objective of a particular team is to answer the call of every player, that 10 times out of 10, they're going to fail. And I do not believe that that is the way that you go about creating a product. I think that you identify your golden cohort, you identify your core audience, and you say, hopefully with this sense, I am a member of that core audience. I know what that core audience desires from a 10,000 foot perspective. I am going to build that, right? And you stick with it. And the moment you have voices that come from a board, or that come from an executive, or that come from a monetization guy, and they say, hey, this has made a lot of money over here, let's make some money over here, right? That is when you start running into the problems. That is when you start running into the identity crisis. And that is not up for discussion, so to speak. But as I said, the subtleties of implementation, the iterative portions of a particular feature or system, those are where player feedback matter. And I'm going to tell you, it's a difficult job parsing through feedback. It is a very difficult one. Roshan and Vaknar and Margaret and Peter, they do great jobs on the community side, and not a lot of teams invest money into community teams this early on, and as early as Ashes did. But it's necessary in order to distill the feedback into actionable items. Otherwise, it would be a very difficult thing.
And they've used that feedback to make many good changes over the years, in my opinion, particularly on combat. I think the changes they've made to combat have been quite positive based on the feedback. So it's great that they're soliciting feedback, and also great that they're sticking to their core design, because we have seen some MMOs that drastically shifted their design and had identity crises before, and the results were often not very good, in my opinion. So guys, with that in mind, if you are interested in having a competitive raiding scene similar to what might exist in the current theme park MMOs, if that's what you want, and if I say that this game might not be for you, that is probably gatekeeping, but is it actually a bad thing? And I could expand this to so many other things. If you have to have full-on action combat in your MMO, this game probably isn't for you. If you don't like a severe lack of fast travel in an MMO, this game is probably not for you. If you don't like it to take a long time to reach max level, this MMO might not be for you. I think you guys probably get the idea at this point. And I want to expand on this a bit further. I do think Steven reaching out to people like Asmongold and several other of the massive content creators he reached out to was a great thing for marketing the game. But part of me does wonder if in the long term that might not be the best thing. The reason for that is some of these guys, in my opinion, are not likely to like Ashes based on what they have liked and not liked in the past. For instance, Asmongold has stated in the past that he does not like to have to travel long distances and prefers fast travel options. He has had some negative views on the always-on PvP that they are going for, so there is a chance he will not like the game and give it a negative review, which will then cause the massive following he has to review bomb the game in a negative way, which we have seen before. These massive streamers have so much power in today's gaming industry, much more than I think they realize. And all that being said, whether Steven brought the game to Asmon's attention or not, I think he probably would have eventually found out about it and played it anyways, so I think the point is probably moot here. And getting back to the gatekeeping discussion, maybe the better term isn't gatekeeping, but instead it is just about making sure the gaming public is properly informed on what this game actually is. Which is what I try to do with this channel, and what I definitely did with my 1.5 hour long video on everything we know about Ashes of Creation. The good thing for the MMO genre going forward is that variety appears to be on the way, for better or for worse. For the longest time, all we had was WoW and different derivations of WoW. We had a pretty severe lack of variety. With Ashes and other upcoming MMOs like PAX Day, we at least have some variety on the way. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. One thing about the MMO genre is that historically there have been massive variations between the different existing MMOs. But WoW crushed many existing MMOs that were different and has made most new MMOs be very homogenized towards the same model. So hopefully we start to get some MMOs that get traction that are actually different for a change. That's all I have for this one, guys. Appreciate you guys watching all the way to the end, and with that, I'll see you in the next video.